Katherine Henderson stood in the general store clutching a piece of paper she could not read, her cheeks burning with shame as the shopkeeper asked her what she needed. 3 months had passed since her husband died from a rattlesnake bite, and every day since had been a battle to survive on the small plot of land outside Pecos, Texas, in the spring of 1876. "I need flour, madam," Katherine finally said, abandoning the list her neighbor had written for her. "And some coffee beans if you have them." The shopkeeper, a stern woman with gray hair pulled tight in a bun, looked at the paper Katherine held. "That is not what your list says, girl. Can you not read your own writing?" "It is not mine," Katherine whispered, wishing the floor would swallow her whole. At 23 years old, she had married James Henderson when she was barely 17, and he had been a kind man but never saw the need to educate his young wife. Her parents had been poor farmers who believed girls only needed to know cooking and cleaning. "Well, what does it say then?" Katherine asked, her voice smaller now. The shopkeeper sighed with obvious impatience. "Beans, cornmeal, salt pork, and molasses. Do you want these items or not?" Katherine nodded quickly, feeling the familiar sting of tears. She had some money from selling eggs and a quilt she had made, but every transaction became an ordeal. She could not keep track of her accounts, could not write receipts, and could barely sign her own name with anything resembling letters. As the shopkeeper gathered her items, Katherine became aware of someone standing behind her. She turned slightly and saw a tall man with sun-weathered skin and dark brown eyes watching her with an expression that was neither mocking nor pitying. He wore a worn hat, dusty boots, and had the look of someone who spent his days working cattle under the merciless Texas sun. "Afternoon," he said quietly, touching the brim of his hat. Katherine nodded, turning back quickly. She paid for her goods with coins she counted carefully, having memorized what each one was worth by touch and size rather than by reading the numbers. The shopkeeper gave her change without comment, and Katherine hurried out with her bundle. She had tied her horse, an aging mare named Bess, to the post outside. As she struggled to secure her purchases to the saddle, the tall man from the store emerged and walked to a magnificent chestnut stallion nearby. "Excuse me, madam," he said, his voice low and respectful. "I could not help but notice you might need some help." Katherine's spine stiffened. "I can manage, thank you." "I am sure you can," he replied, making no move to come closer. "My name is Henry Young. I have the ranch about 5 miles north of town. I knew your husband a bit. We traded work sometimes during branding season. I was sorry to hear of his passing." Katherine's hands stilled on the rope she was tying. "Thank you," she said finally. "That is kind of you to say." Henry shifted his weight, seeming uncertain. "If you ever need help with anything on your property, fixing fences or such, I would be glad to lend a hand. Neighborly, you understand." "I understand charity when I hear it," Katherine said, more sharply than she intended. The shame from the store still burned in her chest. "It is not charity," Henry said, his voice gentle but firm. "Your husband helped me mend my barn roof 2 summers ago when a storm damaged it. I never got the chance to return the favor. I would just be settling an old debt." Katherine looked at him properly then. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with an honest face and steady eyes. There was no mockery in his expression, no condescension. She had grown weary of the pitying looks from townspeople, the whispered conversations about the young widow who could barely manage. "I should be going," she said finally, "but thank you for the offer." Henry nodded and watched as she mounted Bess and rode out of town. Katherine urged the mare into a steady trot, wanting to put distance between herself and the humiliation of the morning. The ride back to her property took nearly an hour, and by the time she arrived, the sun was high and brutal. The small house James had built looked more weathered each day. One of the shutters hung crooked, and she knew the roof leaked in 2 places when it rained. She had 8 chickens, a milk cow, and a small vegetable garden that she tended with fierce determination. It was not much, but it was hers, and she would not lose it. That evening, as Katherine sat on her porch with a cup of weak coffee, she thought about the paper she had received from the county office last week. Someone had ridden out to deliver it, saying it was important, but she had only been able to nod and accept it, having no idea what it contained. It sat on her table inside, a source of constant anxiety. What if it was a notice about taxes? What if someone was trying to take her land? She had no way of knowing. The next day, Katherine was in her garden pulling weeds when she heard a horse approaching. She stood, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and recognized Henry Young riding toward her property. He pulled his stallion to a stop at a respectful distance and dismounted. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Henderson," he called. "I hope I am not intruding." Katherine wiped her dirty hands on her apron. "What brings you out this way, Mr. Young?" "I was heading back from checking my northern fence line and thought I would stop by," he said, walking closer but still maintaining a proper distance. "I noticed your shutter there looks like it might fall off soon. Would you mind if I took a look at it? I have some tools in my saddle bag." Katherine wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her pride and independence, but the truth was she had no idea how to fix the shutter and no money to pay someone to do it. "I suppose that would be all right," she said finally. "Can I offer you some water? It is a hot day." "That would be appreciated," Henry said with a slight smile. She brought him water from her well while he examined the shutter. He worked quietly and efficiently, and within 20 minutes, the shutter was straight and secure. Katherine watched from the garden, noticing how his hands moved with practiced skill, how he seemed at ease with physical work. "There," he said, testing the shutter one more time. "That should hold now." "Thank you," Katherine said. "I appreciate it." Henry walked back toward his horse but paused. "Mrs. Henderson, forgive me if I am speaking out of turn, but I could not help but notice yesterday in the store that you seemed to be having some difficulty with reading." Katherine's face flamed red. "That is not your concern, Mr. Young." "You are right, and I apologize," he said quickly. "I only mention it because I thought perhaps I could help. I could teach you if you were willing. My mother was a school teacher back in Missouri before she passed, and she made sure I got a proper education. I have books, and I know my letters well enough to teach someone else." Katherine stared at him, torn between humiliation and a desperate hope. "Why would you do that?" Henry considered the question carefully. "Because everyone deserves to know how to read and write. It is not right that you should struggle with something that could be taught. And because I believe your husband would have wanted someone to look after you, and this is something I can offer." "I cannot pay you," Katherine said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am not asking for payment," Henry replied. "Just your willingness to learn." Katherine thought about the paper on her table, about the constant fear of being cheated at the store, about the isolation of not being able to read a letter or a newspaper. She thought about the shame that followed her everywhere. "When would we do this?" she asked. "I could come by in the evenings," Henry suggested. "After the day's work is done, we could sit on your porch and I would bring a primer and some paper. We would start simple with the alphabet." "People will talk," Katherine said, knowing how quickly gossip spread in a small town like Pico's. "Let them talk," Henry said with a shrug. "You will be learning something valuable, and I will be honoring my debt to your husband. What people say does not change what is right." Katherine took a deep breath. "All right," she said, "but only if you let me feed you supper in exchange. It is not charity if we are trading." Henry's face broke into a genuine smile. "That seems more than fair, Mrs. Henderson. "Katherine," she said, "if you are going to be coming here regular, you might as well call me Katherine." "Then you should call me Henry," he replied. They agreed he would come by the following evening, and Katherine watched him ride away with a strange mixture of nervousness and anticipation in her chest. That night, she cleaned her small house more thoroughly than she had in weeks, and she planned a proper meal from her limited supplies. Henry arrived the next evening just as the sun was beginning to set, carrying a worn leather satchel. Katherine had prepared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and some preserved vegetables. They ate on her porch, making polite conversation about the weather and the state of the cattle market. Henry had an easy way of talking that made Katherine feel less self-conscious about her own lack of knowledge. After they finished eating, Henry pulled a slate and chalk from his satchel, along with a small primer. "We will start with the basics," he said, settling into the chair across from her. The sun had set, so Katherine lit a candle and placed it on the small table between them. "This is the letter A," Henry said, writing it carefully on the slate. "It makes the sound ah like an apple." Katherine leaned forward, studying the shape. He handed her the chalk and she tried to copy it. Her first attempt was shaky and uneven. "That is good," Henry said encouragingly. "Try it again." They worked through the first 5 letters of the alphabet that evening, with Henry patiently correcting her grip on the chalk and the formation of each letter. Katherine found herself concentrating so hard that she forgot to be embarrassed. There was something intimate about sitting together by candlelight, their heads bent over the slate, Henry's voice low and patient as he explained each sound. "You are a quick learner," Henry said as the candle burned lower. "My mother always said that adults who want to learn often pick things up faster than children because they understand why it matters." "It matters a great deal to me," Katherine admitted. "I have felt helpless for so long." "You will not feel that way for much longer," Henry promised. He came back the next evening and the evening after that. Each night, Katherine prepared supper, and afterward they worked by candlelight on the porch. Within 2 weeks, Katherine knew the entire alphabet and could write her own name properly. The pride she felt when she showed Henry her signature was unlike anything she had experienced since her husband's death. "That is beautiful," Henry said, examining her careful letters. "You should be proud of yourself, Katherine." She was proud, and more than that, she was beginning to look forward to Henry's visits for reasons beyond the lessons. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he guided her grip on the chalk, the patience he showed even when she struggled with a particular concept. One evening in early summer, as they worked on simple words, Henry asked her about the paper she had received from the county office. "I still have it," Katherine admitted. "I have been afraid to ask anyone what it says." "Would you like me to read it?" Henry offered. Katherine retrieved the paper from inside and handed it to him with trembling hands. Henry scanned it quickly by candlelight, and his expression grew serious. "It is about your property taxes," he said carefully. "They are due in 3 months. The amount is listed here." Katherine felt her stomach drop. "How much?" Henry told her the amount, and she did the calculation in her head. With what she made from eggs and the occasional quilt, she might be able to pay it if she was very careful, but it would leave her with almost nothing for supplies. "I could loan you the money," Henry said quietly. "No," Katherine said firmly. "I will manage. I will sell my cow if I must, but I will pay it myself." Henry looked like he wanted to argue but respected her determination. "If you change your mind, the offer stands." As the weeks passed, Katherine's reading improved dramatically. She could now read simple sentences and was beginning to work on writing letters. Henry brought her a small book of poems one evening, saying it had belonged to his mother. "I think you are ready for this," he said, handing it to her carefully. Katherine opened the book, touching the pages with reverence. She read the first line slowly, sounding out each word. It was about love and loss, and by the time she finished the short poem, tears were streaming down her face. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "I never knew words could be like that." "There is a whole world in books," Henry said softly, "and now it is open to you." That night after Henry left, Katherine sat on her porch rereading the poem by candlelight. She thought about how her life had changed in just a few weeks, about how Henry had given her something more valuable than money or physical help. He had given her independence, confidence, and a future that felt less frightening. She also realized, with a flutter in her chest, that she was falling in love with him. The realization terrified her. It had been less than 6 months since James died, and while their marriage had been built on necessity more than passion, she had cared for him. Was it too soon to feel this way about another man? What would people say? What would Henry think if he knew? She tried to push the feelings aside and focus on her lessons, but it became increasingly difficult. She noticed everything about Henry now. The way he smiled when she mastered a difficult word, the gentle tone of his voice, the strength in his shoulders when he helped her move a heavy barrel of water. He had become essential to her evenings, and she found herself preparing more elaborate meals, taking extra care with her appearance, lingering over their conversations. One evening in midsummer, after they had finished their lesson, Henry seemed reluctant to leave. They sat on the porch as the stars came out, the candle between them flickering in the slight breeze. "Katherine," Henry said finally, his voice uncertain in a way she had never heard before. "I hope you will not think me forward, but these evenings with you have become the best part of my day." Katherine's heart hammered in her chest. "They have become important to me as well." "It is more than that for me," Henry continued, turning to face her fully. "I have come to care for you a great deal. I think about you during the day when I am working. I look forward to seeing you each evening. I know it has not been long since your husband passed, and I understand if this is too soon, but I needed you to know how I feel." Katherine met his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the hope mixed with fear. "Henry," she said softly, "I have been feeling the same way. It frightens me because I did not expect to feel this way again, especially so soon. But you have given me so much more than just reading lessons. You have given me hope." Henry reached across the small table and took her hand. His palm was calloused from work but warm and steady. "I do not want to rush you into anything. I just wanted you to know where my heart stands." "I am glad you told me," Katherine said, squeezing his hand, "because my heart has been moving in the same direction." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, the candlelight casting gentle shadows on their faces. When Henry finally stood to leave, he lifted her hand and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. "Good night, Katherine," he said. "Good night, Henry," she replied, her voice full of emotion. After that evening, something shifted between them. The lessons continued, but now they were punctuated with long looks and gentle touches. Henry helped Katherine plant a new garden bed, and she mended a tear in his favorite shirt. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Katherine learned that Henry had come to Texas 5 years ago after his parents died, wanting to build something of his own. He had worked hard to establish his ranch, and now ran several hundred head of cattle with the help of 2 hired hands. "I always imagined sharing it with someone," Henry admitted one evening, "but I never met anyone who felt right until now." Katherine felt the same way. Her marriage to James had been born of necessity and youth, but what she felt for Henry was different. It was built on respect, shared experiences, and genuine affection. He treated her as an equal, valued her opinions, and never made her feel less than him despite her lack of education. One afternoon in late summer, Catherine was in town selling eggs when she overheard two women talking near the mercantile. "That widow Henderson is spending an awful lot of time with Henry Young," one of them said in a loud whisper. "Every single night, I hear," the other replied. "And so soon after her husband's death. It is not proper." Catherine felt her face burn, but she held her head high and walked past them without comment. Let them gossip. She knew the truth of what she and Henry shared, and that was all that mattered. That evening she told Henry what she had heard. He listened with a frown creasing his brow. "Does it bother you?" he asked. "Their words bother me less than I thought they would," Catherine admitted, "but I do not want to damage your reputation in town." "Catherine," Henry said, taking both her hands in his, "I do not care what people say. What I care about is you. If you are comfortable with how things are between us, then that is all that matters." "I am more than comfortable," Catherine said. "I am happy, Henry. Happier than I have been in a long time." "Then that settles it," Henry said firmly. "Anyone who has a problem with our friendship can take it up with me directly." As summer turned to early fall, Catherine's reading and writing skills had improved to the point where she could read the newspaper and write full letters. Henry suggested she write to a cousin she had mentioned in Ohio, and Catherine spent an entire evening composing her first real letter. When she finished, she felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. "Look at how far you have come," Henry said, reading her letter with obvious pride. "A few months ago, you could not write your own name. Now you are writing letters that would put many educated people to shame." "I could not have done it without you," Catherine said. "You did the work," Henry replied. "I just showed you the way." The property tax deadline was approaching, and Catherine had been carefully saving every penny. She had sold several quilts and all the eggs her chickens could produce. She had even traded some preserves for cash. The night before she needed to pay, she counted her money 3 times and realized she was still $5 short. She sat at her table, fighting back tears of frustration. She had worked so hard, had been so careful, but it still was not enough. She considered Henry's offer of a loan, but her pride fought against it. She had wanted to prove she could manage on her own. The next morning, Catherine was preparing to ride into town and explain her situation to the tax collector when Henry appeared at her door. "I know what today is," he said without preamble, "and I know you have been working yourself to the bone trying to get the money together. Henry, if you are here to offer me money again, I cannot accept it," Catherine said, though her voice lacked conviction. "I am not offering you money," Henry said. "I am offering you a solution that benefits us both." Catherine looked at him questioningly. "Marry me," Henry said, his voice steady and sure. "Marry me, and your property becomes part of our joint holdings. The taxes will be easier to manage together, and you will not have to struggle alone anymore. But more than that, marry me because I love you, Catherine. I love your strength, your determination, and the way you refuse to let circumstances defeat you. I love how hard you work to learn, and I love the sound of your laughter when you finally mastered a difficult passage. Marry me because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "People will say I am only marrying you for your money, for security." "Let them say whatever they want," Henry replied, stepping closer and taking her hands. "You and I will know the truth. Will you marry me, Catherine?" Catherine looked into his honest, loving eyes and knew her answer. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Henry. Not because of the taxes or the security, but because I love you too. You have shown me kindness when I needed it most, respect when others offered pity, and love when I thought I might never feel it again." Henry pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We will go into town today and speak with the minister. We do not need a fancy wedding, just a legal union and our commitment to each other." They rode into Pecos together that afternoon, and by evening they were married in a simple ceremony at the small church with the minister and his wife as witnesses. Katherine wore her best dress, which Henry said made her look beautiful, and Henry wore a new shirt he had been saving for a special occasion. After the ceremony, they went to the county office where Henry paid Katherine's property taxes along with his own. Then they rode back to Henry's ranch, which was now Katherine's home as well. The ranch house was larger than Katherine's small cabin, with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Henry carried her over the threshold despite her protests that she was not some delicate flower. "It is tradition," he said with a grin, setting her down gently inside. That night they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion. Henry was patient and gentle, making sure Katherine felt safe and loved. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Katherine marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few months. "Are you happy?" Henry asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I am more than happy," Katherine replied. "I feel like I am finally living the life I was meant to have." The next few weeks were a period of adjustment as Katherine settled into her new home. Henry's 2 ranch hands, an older man named Pete and a young cowboy named Sam, were respectful and welcoming. They had known about Henry's feelings for Katherine and were glad to see him happy. Katherine brought her chickens and cow to the ranch, along with her few possessions. Henry insisted she keep all the furniture from her cabin, saying they could use it to furnish the spare rooms. Together, they rode out to her old property and spent a day moving everything she wanted to keep. "What will happen to the cabin?" Katherine asked, looking at the small house that had been her home. "We can rent it out to someone who needs it," Henry suggested. "Or we can keep it as a line shack for when we have cattle grazing in this area. Either way, it stays in the family." Katherine liked the idea of the cabin still being useful. It had been her refuge during a dark time, and she did not want it to simply fall into disrepair. Life on the ranch was busy but fulfilling. Katherine took over the household management, which included cooking for the ranch hands, maintaining the vegetable garden, and helping with the ranch accounts. Henry taught her how to do bookkeeping, and she took to it naturally, her careful nature making her excellent at tracking expenses and income. In the evenings, they still had their reading sessions by candlelight, though now they sat together on the porch swing Henry had installed. They read books out loud to each other, taking turns with passages. Katherine had developed a love for stories, especially ones about adventure and far-off places. One evening in late fall, as they sat on the swing with a blanket over their legs, Katherine told Henry she was expecting a child. Henry's face lit up with joy. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be," Katherine said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "The baby should come in the spring." Henry pulled her close, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have made me the happiest man in Texas," he said. "We should go into town and see the doctor," Katherine said practically, though she could not stop smiling. "I want to make sure everything is all right." They made the trip to Pecos the following week, and the doctor confirmed what Katherine already knew. He said she was healthy and strong, and he expected no complications. As they left the doctor's office, Henry insisted on stopping at the general store. "We need to celebrate," he said, buying Katherine a new dress and some fabric she had been admiring. He also bought candy, which made Katherine laugh. "You cannot spoil me like this every time something good happens," she protested. "Watch me," Henry replied with a grin. As her pregnancy progressed, Katherine found herself thinking about her own mother, who had died when Katherine was 16. She wished her mother could have seen how her life had turned out, could have known about the grandchild on the way. Henry noticed her melancholy one evening and asked about it. I wish my mother could have known I learned to read and write, Katherine said softly. She always felt bad that she could not teach me herself. She could not read either, and my father refused to let her learn, saying it was not necessary for women. Your mother would be proud of you, Henry said. Not just for learning to read, but for surviving after your husband died, for being brave enough to accept help, and for building a new life. Those are the things that matter. Katherine leaned against him, grateful for his words and his presence. Promise me something, Henry. Anything, he said. Promise me that if we have daughters, we will teach them to read and write just as we would sons. Promise me they will never feel the shame I felt for not knowing. I promise, Henry said solemnly. Any child of ours, daughter or son, will get a proper education. We will make sure of it. Winter came to West Texas, bringing cold nights and occasional frost. Katherine spent her days preparing for the baby, sewing small clothes and blankets. Henry converted one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands. He worked on it in the evenings by lamplight, his face intent with concentration. It is beautiful, Katherine said when he finally showed her the finished cradle. It was made of smooth pine, with careful joints and a gentle rocking motion. Only the best for our child, Henry said, running his hand over the wood one more time to check for any rough spots. On a cold January evening, Katherine was helping Pete with the ranch accounts when she found an error in the previous month's calculations. She corrected it and showed it to Henry, who was impressed by her attention to detail. You have a head for numbers, he said. Better than mine, to be honest. I like how everything has to balance, Katherine admitted. It makes sense in a way that words sometimes do not. Then the books are yours from now on, Henry declared. You have earned the responsibility. Katherine felt proud to be entrusted with such an important part of the ranch operations. She took her duties seriously, keeping meticulous records and finding ways to save money without cutting corners on quality. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Katherine's pregnancy became more obvious. She moved more carefully now, tiring more easily, but she remained active and engaged in ranch life. Henry was protective but not overbearing, understanding that Katherine needed to feel useful and capable. One warm March evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Katherine felt the baby kick for the first time. She grabbed Henry's hand and placed it on her stomach. "Did you feel that?" she asked excitedly. Henry's eyes went wide as he felt the small movement beneath his palm. "That is our baby," he said with wonder. "That is our baby," Katherine confirmed, feeling a surge of love for both the child growing inside her and the man beside her. The baby came on a beautiful April morning in 1877. Katherine's labor started before dawn, and Henry immediately rode to town to fetch the doctor and a midwife. By the time they arrived, Katherine's contractions were strong and regular. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the afternoon. Henry stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth and offering encouragement. The midwife was impressed by his presence, saying most men preferred to wait outside. "I will not leave her," Henry said firmly. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. His cries filled the room, and when the midwife placed him in Katherine's arms, she felt overwhelmed with love and exhaustion. "He is perfect," she whispered, studying his tiny features. Henry looked at his son with awe, touching one small hand with his finger. The baby immediately grasped it, holding on with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Henry asked. "James," Katherine said after a moment. "After my first husband. He would have wanted me to be happy, and I think he would approve of you. It feels right to honor his memory this way." Henry nodded, understanding the significance. James Young, it is a strong name. The weeks after James's birth were exhausting but joyful. Katherine had help from a neighbor woman for the first week, but after that, she managed on her own. Henry was an involved father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with James when he was fussy at night. "You are good at this," Katherine said one night, watching Henry soothe their crying son. "I have a good teacher," Henry replied, smiling at her over the baby's head. As spring turned to summer, life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Katherine managed the household and cared for James while still keeping the ranch books. Henry worked the cattle with Pete and Sam, preparing for the fall sale. They were prospering, and Henry began talking about expanding the herd and maybe building a bigger barn. One evening in late summer, after they had put James to bed, Katherine and Henry sat on the porch swing reading together. It was something they still did regularly, even with the added responsibilities of parenthood. "You remember the first night we sat here together?" Katherine asked. "When you were teaching me the alphabet by candlelight." "I remember every night," Henry said. "I fell in love with you during those lessons, though I did not realize it at first. Watching you work so hard to learn, seeing your determination and your pride when you mastered something new, it all captivated me." "I fell in love with you too," Katherine admitted. "With your patience, your kindness, and the way you never made me feel stupid or less than you. You gave me confidence in myself." "You always had that confidence," Henry said. "You just needed the tools to use it." They rocked gently on the swing, comfortable in the silence that came from deep understanding and love. Katherine thought about how far she had come from that humiliated woman in the general store who could not read her own list. She had built a new life, learned new skills, and found a love that sustained her. The following year brought both challenges and blessings. A drought in late summer threatened the cattle, and Henry had to make the difficult decision to sell some of the herd early to preserve grazing for the rest. Katherine supported him through the worry, helping him run the numbers and make the best decision for their future. "We will rebuild," she assured him. "We are strong enough to weather this." Her faith in him and in their partnership gave Henry the courage to make the hard choices. They sold half the herd at a decent price and used some of the money to dig a new well that would provide water during future dry spells. In the spring of 1878, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Henry was just as attentive, but Katherine was more confident in her body's ability to do what was needed. Their second child, a daughter, was born in December of that year during a rare Texas snowstorm. They named her Mary, after Henry's mother. She had Katherine's dark hair and Henry's brown eyes, and from the beginning, she was a calm, observant baby. With 2 children, the ranch house felt full of life and love. James, now nearly 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Katherine spent her days managing a busy household while Henry continued to rebuild the herd. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Henry pulled Katherine into his arms. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying me so quickly after James Henderson died, taking on this life?" Katherine looked up at him, surprised by the question. "Never," she said firmly. "You saved me, Henry, not just by teaching me to read, but by showing me I was worth saving. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I loved you then." "I love you too," Henry said, kissing her softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." As the years passed, the young ranch continued to prosper. By 1880, they had rebuilt the herd to pre-drought levels and had even purchased some of the surrounding land, including Katherine's original cabin. Henry hired additional help, allowing him to spend more time with his family. Katherine continued to manage the ranch books and had become known in Pecos as a shrewd businesswoman. People who had once gossiped about the widow who could not read now came to her for advice on managing household accounts and budgets. She helped several other women in town learn to read and write, holding lessons in her home one afternoon a week. "You are doing what my mother did," Henry said proudly, "passing on knowledge to those who need it." "It is important," Katherine said. "No woman should feel the shame I felt for not knowing how to read." James and Mary grew into bright, curious children. True to their promise, Katherine and Henry taught both of them their letters as soon as they were old enough. By the time James was 5, he could read simple books, and Mary was not far behind him. In 1882, Katherine gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas. The birth was easy, and Thomas was a happy, healthy baby who laughed easily and slept through the night early on. Life was full and rich. The ranch house that had once seemed large now felt perfectly sized for their growing family. Henry had added on to it, building a larger kitchen and another bedroom. He also built a proper schoolroom where Katherine could hold her lessons for the town women and teach their own children. One fall evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Katherine reflected on how much had changed since that humiliating day in the general store 6 years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Henry asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About how one act of kindness changed everything," Katherine said. "If you had not offered to teach me to read, I would still be struggling alone in that cabin, probably losing my land, definitely losing hope." "You would have found a way," Henry said. "You are stronger than you think." "Maybe," Katherine acknowledged, "but I would not have found this happiness. I would not have found you." Henry took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "We found each other. That is what matters." As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Katherine felt a deep sense of contentment. She had faced hardship and loss, shame and struggle, but she had emerged stronger. She had learned to read and write, had become a capable ranch manager, and had built a family filled with love. The children's laughter rang out in the evening air as James chased Mary around the yard while little Thomas sat on a blanket, watching his siblings with delight. Katherine and Henry sat together on the porch swing, the same swing where they had shared so many candlelit lessons years ago. "Read to me," Henry said, handing Katherine the book of poems that had belonged to his mother, the same book he had given her when she was first learning. Katherine opened the well-worn book and began to read, her voice confident and clear. The words flowed smoothly now, where once they had been a struggle. As she read a poem about enduring love, she felt Henry's arm around her shoulders and knew that every hardship she had faced had been worth it to arrive at this moment. The candlelight flickered on the porch as evening turned to night, and Katherine continued reading to her husband, their children playing nearby, secure in the love and stability their parents had built together. It was a simple moment, but it contained everything that mattered: family, love, purpose, and the hard-won peace that comes from overcoming adversity together. In the years that followed, the young family continued to thrive. Their ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealing. Katherine's literacy program expanded, and she helped establish a proper school in Pecos, where children of all backgrounds could receive an education. She served on the school board, one of the first women in the area to hold such a position. Henry supported her endeavors fully, proud of the woman she had become, and the difference she was making in their community. He often said that teaching her to read was the best decision he had ever made, not just because of what it meant for Katherine, but because of how she used that knowledge to help others. Their children grew up strong and educated. James developed a love for ranching and worked alongside his father, learning the business from the ground up. Mary became an avid reader like her mother and talked about becoming a teacher. Thomas, the youngest, showed an aptitude for numbers and helped Catherine with the ranch accounts even as a young boy. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1886, Henry surprised Catherine with a gift. It was a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover. "What is this for?" Catherine asked, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "For your story," Henry said. "I thought you might want to write down everything that has happened, how far you have come, not just for us but for our children and their children. So they will know about the strength of their mother and grandmother." Catherine was moved to tears. That night, after everyone else was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table by lamplight and began to write. She wrote about her childhood, her first marriage, the loss and loneliness after James Henderson died. She wrote about the shame of not being able to read and the kindness of a rancher who offered to teach her by candlelight. She wrote about falling in love, building a family, and finding her purpose. As she wrote, Catherine realized that her story was not just about learning to read and write. It was about transformation, about refusing to let circumstances define her, and about the power of love to heal and restore. It was about a man who saw her worth when she could not see it herself, and about building something beautiful from the ruins of loss. She wrote late into the night, filling page after page with her story. When she finally put down her pen, she felt a sense of completion, as if by writing it all down, she had fully claimed her journey and all the lessons it had taught her. Henry found her there in the morning, her head resting on her arms at the table, the journal open beside her. He read what she had written, and when she woke up, there were tears in his eyes. "This is beautiful," he said. "This is our story, and it is beautiful." "It is not finished yet," Catherine said, smiling up at him. "We still have many more chapters to write together." And they did. Over the years, Catherine continued to add to her journal, recording the major events and small moments that made up their life together. She wrote about birthdays and holidays, about droughts and good years, about the children's accomplishments and the inevitable challenges that came with raising a family. In 1890, when James was 13, Mary 11, and Thomas 8, the family took a trip to San Antonio. It was the farthest Catherine had ever traveled, and she was amazed by the size of the city and the diversity of people. They visited the Alamo, and Catherine made sure the children understood the history and significance of the place. "History matters," she told them. "Understanding where we come from helps us know where we are going." The trip was a memorable one, strengthening the family bonds and creating memories they would cherish for years to come. On the journey home, as they camped under the stars, Catherine and Henry lay together in their bedroll, listening to the children's quiet breathing nearby. "Thank you," Catherine whispered. "For what?" Henry asked. "For everything," Catherine said. "For seeing potential in me when I could not see it myself, for being patient when I struggled, for loving me through all the changes and growth, for giving me this beautiful life." "You gave me just as much," Henry replied. "You made my house a home, you gave me children and partnership. You showed me what real strength looks like. I am the one who should be thanking you." They held each other under the vast Texas sky, grateful for the journey that had brought them together and the love that sustained them through everything. As the children grew older, they each began to forge their own paths. James took over more responsibility on the ranch, showing a natural talent for working with cattle and managing men. Henry was proud to see his son developing into a capable rancher who would one day inherit the family business. Mary, true to her childhood dreams, became a teacher. She attended normal school in Austin and returned to Pecos to teach at the school her mother had helped establish. Katherine was immensely proud watching her daughter stand before a classroom, passing on knowledge to the next generation. Thomas, with his head for numbers, went to work for a bank in San Antonio but came home regularly to visit. He managed investments for the ranch, helping to diversify the family's holdings beyond cattle. In 1895, 20 years after Katherine had stood in the general store unable to read her list, she and Henry celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children organized a party at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors from all over the county. At the party, Katherine looked around at the gathered crowd and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. There were people she had taught to read, families she had helped with their finances, neighbors they had supported through hard times. The ranch had become a hub of community activity, and the young family was respected throughout the region. As the sun set on the day of their anniversary celebration, Henry pulled Katherine onto the porch, away from the crowd. 20 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. It has been a good 20 years, Katherine said, leaning against him. The best of my life, Henry agreed. And I am looking forward to 20 more and 20 after that. That is a lot of years, Katherine said with a laugh. Not nearly enough, Henry replied, kissing her softly. They stood together on the porch, the sound of music and laughter drifting out from the house, and watched the sun set over their land. It was the same porch where Henry had taught Katherine her letters by candlelight so many years ago, where they had fallen in love over primers and poetry, where they had built the foundation for the life they now shared. In the years that followed, Katherine and Henry became grandparents. James married a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and they gave Katherine and Henry their first grandchild, a girl they named Katherine in honor of her grandmother. Mary married a fellow teacher, and they had twin boys. Even Thomas, who everyone thought would remain a bachelor focused on his banking career, surprised them all by marrying and starting a family. Katherine loved being a grandmother. She read to her grandchildren the same way Henry had read to her, passing on the love of words and stories. She taught them their letters when they were old enough, remembering how transformative that knowledge had been in her own life. Henry, now in his late 50s, began to slow down a bit, letting James handle more of the ranch operations. He spent more time on the porch with Katherine, reading and talking and watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played. One evening, as they sat together reading, Katherine closed her book and looked at Henry thoughtfully. "What is it?" he asked. "I was just thinking about how different my life could have been," Katherine said. "If you had not stopped to help that day, if you had not offered to teach me, I would have lost my land, probably would have ended up working as a domestic somewhere, struggling to survive. Instead, I have this beautiful life, this family, this purpose. It all started with your kindness. It started with your willingness to accept help and work hard to change your circumstances," Henry corrected gently. "I just showed you the door. You walked through it yourself." "We walked through it together," Katherine said. "That is the truth of it. We built this life together, partnership every step of the way." Henry reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of 25 years of marriage. "Together," he agreed, "always together." As the years continued to pass, Katherine kept writing in her journal, documenting the life they built together. She wrote about the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and challenges. She wrote about Henry's steady presence through it all, his unwavering support and love. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Katherine and Henry celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. They were now in their 50s, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of hard work and full lives. But their love had only deepened with time. At the anniversary celebration, their children asked Katherine to speak. She stood before the gathered crowd, her family and friends, and shared her story. She talked about not being able to read, about the shame and fear of those early days after her first husband died. She talked about Henry's kindness in offering to teach her, and how those candlelit lessons had changed everything. "I learned more than reading and writing on that porch," Katherine said, her voice strong and clear. "I learned that it is never too late to change, that accepting help is not weakness but wisdom, and that love can heal even the deepest wounds. Henry taught me my letters, but more importantly, he taught me my own worth. He showed me that I was capable of more than I ever imagined." There were few dry eyes in the crowd as Katherine finished speaking. Henry stood and joined her, pulling her into his arms as their family and friends applauded. That night, after everyone had gone home, Katherine and Henry sat on their porch swing, bundled in blankets against the cool spring night. The candles they had once learned by had been replaced by oil lamps, but the feeling was the same: intimate, peaceful, full of love. "I could not have dreamed a better life," Katherine said softly. "Neither could I," Henry replied. "You have been my greatest adventure, Katherine Young." "And you have been mine," she said, resting her head on his shoulder. They rocked gently on the swing, listening to the sounds of the Texas night: cattle lowing in the distance, the chirp of crickets, the soft rustle of wind through the grass. It was the same land where Katherine had once struggled alone, where she had feared losing everything. Now it was filled with love, family, and the promise of generations to come. In 1903, Katherine published a small book about teaching adults to read, using her own experience as the foundation. The book was well received and helped establish literacy programs throughout Texas and beyond. She received letters from women all over the country thanking her for her work and sharing their own stories of learning to read later in life. Henry was enormously proud of her accomplishment. He told everyone who would listen about his wife's book, about her literacy programs, about the difference she was making. He had always known she was special, and now the world was recognizing it too. As they entered their 60s, Katherine and Henry settled into a peaceful rhythm. James ran the ranch with his father's guidance. Mary continued teaching and had taken over running Katherine's literacy program. Thomas had become a successful banker and helped manage the family's financial interests. The grandchildren were growing up healthy and educated, carrying on the values Katherine and Henry had instilled. One quiet evening in 1908, 33 years after they had first sat together on the porch for a reading lesson, Katherine and Henry were doing what they had always done, reading together by lamplight. Katherine was reading aloud from a new novel, her voice as confident and clear as it had become over the decades. When she finished the chapter, Henry took the book from her hands and set it aside. He pulled her close and kissed her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. "I fall more in love with you every day," he said. "You have given me the best life a man could ask for." "We gave it to each other," Katherine replied, as she always did. "Together." "Together," Henry agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and peaceful. In the house behind them, photographs documented the life they had built. Their wedding day, their children as babies and grown adults, their grandchildren's smiling faces. But the most important story was not captured in any photograph. It was written in Katherine's journals, lived out in every day they spent together, and embodied in the love that had sustained them through everything. It was the story of a widow who could not read or write, and a rancher who taught her every night by candlelight. It was the story of how education became love, and how love became a legacy that would endure for generations. As the evening stars shone above the Texas plains, Katherine and Henry Young sat together on their porch swing, right where their story had begun, living proof that kindness, patience, and love could transform a life and build something beautiful that would last forever. Their story continued for many more years, each one adding new chapters to the life they had built together. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other and to the values that had brought them together: education, hard work, family, and love. And when, years later, their grandchildren would ask about how they met and fell in love, Katherine and Henry would tell them about the candlelit lessons, the patient teaching, and the moment they both knew their hearts belonged together. It was, they would say, the best story they knew because it was real, it was theirs, and it had given them everything that mattered. And as they grew old together, surrounded by family and the fruits of their labor, they knew that the most important lesson they had ever learned was the simplest one: that love, offered freely and accepted gratefully, could change everything. The end came peacefully for both of them, many years later, when they had lived full lives and seen their great-grandchildren begin to grow. Henry passed first in 1920, at the age of 72, with Katherine holding his hand. She followed him 2 years later, at 70, her journals and legacy of literacy work ensuring that she would never be forgotten. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their headstone bore simple words: "Together always." Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren stood at their graves and told stories about the widow who could not read and the rancher who taught her by candlelight, and how their love had created a family legacy of education, compassion, and enduring devotion. The ranch continued to thrive under James's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren. The literacy programs Katherine started continued to help people throughout Texas. Mary's teaching legacy lived on through her students and her own children who became educators. Thomas's financial acumen helped secure the family's prosperity for generations. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the story itself. The reminder that it is never too late to learn, never too late to change, and never too late to find love. Katherine and Henry's story became a part of family lore, told and retold at gatherings, a testament to the transformative power of kindness and the enduring nature of true love. In the end, the widow had learned to read and write, had built a prosperous life, and had found a love that sustained her through everything. The rancher had found a partner who matched him in strength and determination, who gave him a family and a purpose beyond mere survival. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, proving that the best stories are the ones we write with our own lives, one day, one choice, one act of love at a time.